So our session today is Microsoft Dynamics SL and reconciliation between the accounts receivable and the general ledger module. On the agenda today, we're going to look at reports that we can run within the general ledger module, also some reports that we can run in the accounts receivable module, and then we're going to compare the reports between the two modules and help us reconcile any differences that we may find between the two. And we're also going to touch on the accounts receivable integrity check as well. Just to give you an overview kind of on the reconciliation process and what we're looking at here, all of the information that's entered in the accounts receivable is going to update a general ledger account on your GL side. So when we're referring to reconciling the accounts receivable account, I'm referring to reconciling that AR account in the general ledger and matching that up to your total accounts receivable from your accounts receivable module itself, making sure the balance is the same between the two. We're going to take a look at reports in the accounts receivable module that can be used to verify that these amounts are the same, also some on the general ledger side as I mentioned. It is recommended that we reconcile the balances as part of each month-end closing process. And performing this monthly is going to provide you with the benefit of having correct documentation available if there's an audit scheduled, and then also just any inconsistencies in the information between those two modules can be identified and corrected before the period is closed out for the month. On the general ledger side, the first thing that we want to do, just first and foremost before we even touch on these reports here, is the GL transactions report. And there's an unposted format of that report that you can use to check to make sure that there's no unposted batches, specifically for the period or even prior period that we're trying to reconcile. So if you run the report, you find that there's unposted batches, we want to make sure that we get those posted. And then to obtain the balance of your accounts receivable count in the general ledger, we have the GL trial balance report available. So we'll take a deeper dive with the trial balance report then. And there's two formats of the trial balance report in the general ledger that are available to us. One is the debit and credit total format. The other is the combined totals format. And the one we'll be looking at throughout the webinar today is the debit and credit totals format. So we want to print the report, like I said, either format for just the account that we're balancing. And you can add the following information to the Select tab of the report prior to generating it. What I've got it restricted to here is on our account equals to account 1100, and this is my accounts receivable account that I'm going to be reconciling in our webinar here today. So I've restricted the report just to that. I don't need all the other account information on the report for what I'm looking for. If we run this report then, this is going to provide us with the, depending on which format you run, here we're running debit and credit total format, so I actually have a breakout of the total debits and total credits for the period I ran the report for. Also gives us the beginning balance and ending balance on the account. So in this case, our AR total then on the general ledger side is our $58,834.62. On the accounts receivable side then, first thing that we want to run when you're on the accounts receivable side is a batch register report. And this is just to make sure that there's no open AR batches for the current period. And if you do find any such batches, we want to make sure that those batches are processed through. You might have maybe an invoice batch that's sitting out there in a hold status or balance status waiting to be processed. Anything like that. Maybe a payment batch that was applied but hasn't been released, something like that. You just want to make sure that you process those batches through. And then to verify that the accounts receivable amount and the general ledger amounts are the same for the current period, or even if you're reconciling past period, you can use several different reports in the accounts receivable module. So we have the customer trial balance report. And if you're using that particular report, we recommend using the open documents only format. There's also the aged AR report, and if you use that, we recommend the summary customer balances format. Now if you're reconciling for past periods, so the first two would be if you're reconciling a current period. If you're reconciling a past period, then you can use the customer period trial balance report or period sensitive aged AR report. These two reports are for prior periods, and they're going to show you the document balances as of that period, and then also, it'll allow us to reconcile to your general ledger for that prior period. On the accounts receivable side here, we will look more closely at the customer period trial balance report. And if you recall, we were reconciling account 1100 on the general ledger side. So I want to run through a couple different scenarios with the customer period trial balance report. We're actually going to be doing a prior period as well in my demo database. So this is why I'm using the period trial balance report. In this scenario, though, I've not included any select criteria to restrict the report to my account 1100. So if I run this report, it's going to list for us. I'm not necessarily concerned with seeing all the data on this report as much as I am with getting the total at the end of the report. But the data on this report is just going to provide us a listing of all of the open documents for the customer entered for the period that we run the report for. And it's going to total for us by our AR account, and these totals should tie to your general ledger AR account. So I just ran this report. Again, no select criteria on it. I look at our accounts receivable total at the end of the report, and I see I've got a balance of $60,534.62. Now, dealing with the same report, customer period trial balance, this time, however, we're going to add some select criteria on the report. So I'm restricting it specifically to activity that's hit only my AR account 1100. If I run this report, the balance on the end of the report is $58,934.62. So it's actually different than what we had on the report with the select criteria on that. And we'll touch on what makes up that difference here. If we look at a comparison of the two reports, our report in the upper left-hand corner of the screen is the report with no select criteria on it for account 1100. And it's actually given us some detail on this report for an account 3000. So not only are we getting account 1100 information, we're also getting account 3000 information on here too. And that's where we're getting a total of 60,000. The report in the lower right-hand corner, though, did have the select criteria on it for account 1100 and only account 1100. And so our AR total on this report is for 58,000. So you can see the difference. If you're using multiple AR accounts or even sub-accounts, you want to make sure to distinguish that on your reports when you're running these, because we might not be keeping things level between accounts receivable and general ledger when you're looking at these balances. So that was the customer period trial balance report. The other report that I mentioned you could use for reconciling prior periods was the period sensitive aged AR report. And in this scenario, there is no select criteria included on this report. And if we run this, again, giving us open documents as of the period, and we're mostly concerned with the total at the end of the report at this point. This total that we get here is $60,534.62. This happens to match the customer period trial balance report that we ran that did not have select criteria on it either. If we run the same period sensitive aged AR report, but this time we add a select criteria on it and restrict it to AR account 1100. If I run this report, we get our $58,934.62 total. This happens to match our customer period trial balance report that did have the select criteria on it. So you can see the difference that the reports, the way that they pull the data, we need to restrict it by sub-account if necessary, or I'm sorry, account and or sub-account if necessary to keep everything level. So upper left-hand corner is with no select criteria on the period sensitive aged AR report. We're getting a 60,000 figure. So there's must be something, aside from just our 1100 account that's being included there. On the lower right-hand corner with the select, we can see that something's being restricted to give us to a lesser figure of 58,000. In my scenarios, I've been, on the general ledger side, I restricted to 1100. So that the figure that we're going to be using from the AR side is the 58,934. The account total on that GL trial balance report should balance then with the total on the accounts receivable report. whichever one of those you prefer to run. You can run all of them. You can run, whichever you prefer. If those total balances, you're good to go. There's no further reconciliation needed. To keep things fun, our figures don't match, so we're going to have some more work to do here. But one thing I do want to point out, just to kind of recap what we've been looking at with the various reports here, if you do have multiple AR accounts or multiple sub-accounts with one AR account, you want to do one of two things. You can either print the AR report with the select statement to include it, have it include only the one AR account or sub-account, and then use the same select statement on your GL trial balance and compare each AR account one by one. Or you could add up all of your AR accounts, and you would want to do that both on your general ledger side and your AR side and look at those as a total combined and reconcile from there. So we've looked at our AR report, which is the report on the top here, our period-sensitive aged AR, and we looked at our general ledger trial balance report, which is the report on the bottom of the screen. And you can see the AR side is giving us a total of $58,934.62, while general ledger is giving us a total of $58,834.62. So we're actually off by $100 that we're trying to reconcile here. There are various detailed reports that are available in Dynamics SL to help us find these differences. We can print the detailed general ledger report out of the general ledger module, and this is going to show us in detail all of the entries that have been posted to your AR account and sub-account for the period. On that report, there is a journal type field that lists the module that the entry originated in. So it could be, accounts receivable, it could be general ledger, it could be accounts payable. Very rare in occurrence, but it could happen that when entering a general ledger batch, so you're directly in the GL module, keying in a journal transaction batch, someone could potentially change the journal type to accounts receivable. You'd have to be in initialized mode to do something like that, but if that should happen in that particular case, it probably is not going to help you identify the necessary transactions to find your out of balances. But just something to keep in the back of your mind. Probably not very likely that you would run across it, but it can happen. Also on the report is a tran type field, and this is on the detailed general ledger report. And using this tran type field in addition to the journal type field will help you, give you more information about the entries that are on that report. So if it's coming from accounts receivable, if your journal type is AR, possible tran types that you might see, maybe an invoice, IN, or PA for payment. The tran type is the equivalent of basically your document type of your original document. And if you find a journal type other than AR on your detailed general ledger report, what this would indicate to you is that there was an entry that was entered using the AR account through a module other than accounts receivable. So typically we would want any transactions that are being made to our AR account 1100, those should flow through the accounts receivable module. If you're using flexible billings, you could see some BI items on there too. That would be acceptable. But if you have something maybe that's coded as a GL journal type on this detailed GL report and it's hit your account 1100, that entry would affect the balance on your AR account on the general ledger side, but it's not going to be included on your AR reports from the accounts receivable module. So you can see how that would create a difference between the two. So we're going to look more closely now at ways that we can reconcile our $100 difference that we're trying to find. And I had mentioned the detailed general ledger report. So we can use this to check for entries to the AR account, sub-accounts that did not originate from the AR module. This particular report here, if we just run this, I do not have any module restriction on it. I do have a restriction for my AR account. I only want to see detail that's been posted or entered to account 1100, but I'm not restricting it to any particular module. So if we run this report, looking at the journal type, the very first column, we do see that everything is AR for accounts receivable, which is good. You could potentially have lots and lots of pages of this particular report, though, and to sift through this report and look at the journal type field on every page could be quite cumbersome. So there's ways that we can help you find those types of entries. But running it this way without any module restriction first does give us useful information as well, because if you look at the very end of the report, and this is what I want to show you here, it provides us with the debit and credit totals, which should tie out to an accounts receivable report that we're going to review coming up. So if we look at our total debits and our total credits, we got a total debit of $221,000, total credits of $254,000, and then it also gives us our AR total again, which is our $58,834.62. That AR total should also match to our GL trial balance report, and it actually does, so we're good there. But if we go on and look at the detailed general ledger report again, this time I've added select criteria on here, though, to not only restrict it by the AR account 1100, but I've also restricted it to only show us information that did not originate in the AR or flexible billings modules. So when we run the report this time, we'll get no data on it. And we know from running it before with no module restriction on it that everything was from accounts receivable. So if we run it asking for everything that did not originate from AR or flexible billings, we get no data. And this is good because we actually don't want any data on this particular report. But if something would show up on here, it would probably be something that was maybe keyed into general ledger using your account 1100, and again, it's just affecting the account balance on GL side, not on the AR side, so it's certainly create an out of balance situation. So that was the report we can run on the general ledger side. If we look on the accounts receivable side, there is the account distribution report, and this is going to give us a listing of the AR transactions, and it sorts them for us by account number. It also includes for us debit and credit totals. So the importance of this report, again, I've restricted it to just our account 1100, but we can review this report to ensure that the AR account was properly debited for invoices and debit memos, and then also properly credited for payments, credit memos, and finance charges. But the balances on this report should match the balances for the AR account on the detailed general ledger report. If we look at our total debits, total credits, we've got, on the AR side, we got $229,000 total debits and total credits of $254,000. So our total credits match between AR and GL, but the debits are actually off by a little bit. So that is one thing to note here, and I think we'll come back and circle back to this after bits here. So comparing the AR account distribution report to the detailed general ledger report, there's actually some invoices on the AR account distribution report that were not included on the detailed general ledger report. So those invoices happen to be posted to period 12 of 2003 on the AR side, but in general ledger they were posted to period 11 of 2003. So when we look at the detailed activity reports for period 12 that we're trying to reconcile, it would be off between accounts receivable and general ledger. So that's why on the previous slide, the total debits actually did not match for the period between AR and GL, but overall the accounts receivable balances worked themselves out because it was actually a prior period in general ledger. So this isn't necessarily playing part in our particular $100 out of balance that we're trying to reconcile, but it's just kind of giving you some more information on things that you could encounter here. So the next report we can use out of accounts receivable is the AR transactions report. And this report is useful to help us look in more detail at transactions that may come into question as a result of reviewing your other reports. You can also use this report to check and make sure that the AR account was properly debited for invoices in your debit memos and then properly credited for your payments and credit memos. We can add specific select criteria to this report to help us in doing that. So with this report here, I want to run it to make sure that the AR account was properly debited for invoices and debit memos. We're only looking at the debit activity. Select criteria that I add to this report is set to pull only activity to account 1100 and then only activity that should have debits to the AR account. So invoices or debit memos. So when we run this report, everything on here should be a debit to AR. So the credit column on the report is what we want to pay attention to. Debit, we would expect activity, but the credits should all be zero. And on this particular report, we actually have a $100 credit. I did a little bit of investigating on this and concluded that we have an invoice or a debit memo that incorrectly credited the AR account $1,100. And it was an instance where the credit was hitting $1,100 and the debit was hitting account $3,000. So it was actually the opposite of what the entry should have been keyed in as. Instead of doing a debit to $1,100 and a credit to $3,000, it was the exact opposite. So that's why we're getting a credit total here of $100. So this actually kind of finds our out of balance for us. And in this type of situation, it would just be a matter of entering a reversing entry to reverse out that particular invoice and then rekeying it in correctly. And that would resolve that particular out of balance. We're going to continue on, even though that explained our particular $100 out of balance, there's additional items that we're going to continue to take a look at here. So on the flip side, we were looking at debit activity. You also want to look at credit activity. So we can run the AR transaction report, restricting it to account $1,100. And then this time for the tran type, instead of it being invoice or debit memo, I've got PA for payment and CM for credit memo. So payment and a credit memo would be credits to our AR account. So if we look at the report, our debit activity should be zero on the report. In this particular instance, we are good to go, so there's no issues here. If you review all these reports and nothing is jumping out at you, you can't find any out of balances, anything that's explaining the out of balance, we can run the accounts receivable integrity check. So we usually recommend using that as a last resort, and I do want to go over it with you guys today, so we're going to touch on that in a little bit more detail coming up here. But first, I'd like to recap just on what we've looked at and kind of where we got the numbers from. So discrepancies between the balances of the AR period reports and the general ledger balance on your AR account, generally it's usually caused by entries that were affecting the AR module that are never posted to your general ledger accounts, or entries were made directly to the AR account in general ledger, did not originate through the AR module. You could also have a discrepancy due to a document incorrectly debiting or crediting the AR account, as we saw in our instance. So those are usually the scenarios that you'll run into. If you have an out of balance, it is a good idea just to check back to prior months so you can work back in that prior month to actually start reconciling where the out of balance originated. Recap on this screen here. First thing I have is a GL transactions report to run that and check for unposted batches. I should actually have moved in the AR section on the lower half of the screen there, the batch register report. That should actually be the first one you run, because if you have any open AR batches, you want to make sure you process those through on accounts receivable. They're then going to flow through to general ledger to be posted. So run your AR batch register first, make sure you process any open batches. Then we'll jump to the top of my list here and run your GL transactions report and make sure you've got everything posted. And the next report we looked at was the GL trial balance report, and from that particular report we grabbed the AR account balance, which in this case happened to be $58,834.62. Then we went to the detailed general ledger report to look for any batches that did not originate from accounts receivable entries. If there's anything there, you're going to want to add in your credits and subtract out your debits. We didn't find anything on those particular reports, so that remains at zero. And that would then take you to your adjusted GL balance. So we stay at our $58,834. On the AR side then, we would have already checked the batch register report, so you can either use customer period trial balance or period sensitive aged AR. Either one of those if you're reconciling a prior period. If you're reconciling your current period, it would be the customer trial balance or aged AR report. And from either one of those or both of them, they should match. You can grab your AR account balance. And from our AR reports, we grabbed the 58,934.62. We then looked at the AR transactions report, and we ran that in two different scenarios, looking for wrong postings for our debit activity. And if you do have any credits, you want to negate those out. So we subtracted out our $100. And then if you have any mispostings to your credit accounts, you would want to add in those debits. And we had 0 in our case, which would then take you to your adjusted AR balance of 58,834.62. So we end up balancing then to our general ledger. So we were able to find it. And I told you then that we would touch on the accounts receivable integrity check. If you review everything else, they fail to turn up any of the differences that you're looking for, and then you can turn to this AR integrity check. I do want to caution you that this should be used as a last resort, and you want to make sure that you've got a recent backup of your Dynamics SL databases, because some of the options on the screen will change data in your database. So run this with caution. If there are problems found using the verify options on the screen, they're going to be noted in an event log for you. And you can print that out and review that. And I would recommend doing that, running any of the verify options first before you do the corrects or rebuilds on the screen. So at least you have an idea of what's going to be rebuilt or corrected before you run that. The first option on the screen here is the verify posted AR batches. And this particular item will go through your AR batches, and it just checks them for completeness and accuracy. It will look at each batch and ensures that there's documents for the batch, and then that the document amounts equal your batch control total. We've got the verify customer balances. This one reviews the document balances for each customer, and it compares the open balances to the amount stored on the customer's record. The item indented beneath this is the correct customer balances to total document balance. So it will actually go out and compute every customer's balance based on the open AR documents that are in the system, and it will correct anything that needs corrected to match those new totals that are calculated. So this is one that changes data. Make sure you have backups before running this option. The next one is to verify the payment applications. And this particular process will review any payment and credit memo documents to make sure that they have been correctly applied. We also have the rebuild AR history from documents. What this one does is it will actually update. Again, this is another one that updates, so you want to make sure you have your backup. But it will update the customer history records by summarizing your AR documents for each customer by period. The next one is to verify periods of closing. And by periods of closing, this just means the period in which a document is paid off or fully applied. So it looks at the AR documents and it compares the period closed field to the period to post of the application batch that paid it off, and just make sure that the period of closing is correct. The option beneath that then is to correct the periods of closing. So it will actually go through and update the period closed field on any documents that are not correct based on that previous verification option. So again, that's another backup item. Make sure you have your backup before we run that.